I want to welcome everybody to OPN, all the viewers and chatters, and give my thanks in advance to the other stations that are mirroring us. I know that we're up on Occupy World News Now and probably several other channels. We appreciate your guys' continuing support. And I'm thrilled and happy to welcome Aquene Freechild from Democracy is for People Now / Public Citizen. And everybody that's familiar with us knows that's where our friend Organizer X is working. So we're really fortunate to have that connection made. And thank you, Queenie, for being with us tonight. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's I want to give thanks to Clearly for helping put this one together. And we got a lot of topics we want to run over tonight, so I think we're going to go ahead and launch into it. And as usual, we'll take questions towards the end of the show. You guys have a minute to tweet it out and tell your friends and bring your neighbors over for a potluck and another OPN show. That'll be great because we want to spread the message of social justice. So, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I'm glad power's good on both ends and all of that. Why don't you start off with a little bit more of a detailed introduction about yourself and how you came to be an activist and work in an activist organization.
Happy to do that. So my name is Aquene Freechild. I'm a senior organizer with the Democracy is for People campaign at Public Citizen. And that website, just to start out, is democracyisforpeople.org. How did I become an activist? I think for me, I actually have a rare background, I think, in that my mom woke me up every morning saying, "Rise and shine, make the world a better place today." And I've just been raised to be an activist, and luckily I absolutely have always wanted to be an activist since I was a little kid. So I started, at 11 collecting clothes for the homeless, the kinds of charity sort of advocacy that you see children start with, I think. And then got my training through WISPIRG, Wisconsin Student Pergs at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Learned how to talk to big groups of people, learned how to power map and build coalitions and recruit people. I'm really grateful for that background. Then I worked on an environmental justice, human rights fight against Dow Chemical, trying to get the survivors of the world's worst chemical disaster in Bhopal, India, clean water, justice, working directly with the survivors. It's a survivor-led movement that continues till today, just as the poisoning that the Dow Chemical Union Carbide did continues. So that was wonderful. I did that for 5 years, worked on environmental health issues with Healthcare Without Harm at that time as well. Then I went to school for a bit to consider what to do next. Worked on some climate issues, climate education with the Alliance for Climate Education, well named. And then came upon the amendment work. I've always really wanted to do the hard work, the political advocacy that is the big questions, the big underlying problems that some people really don't feel strong enough, I think, to do. Like, it might take a long time. It might be very unpopular. It might be popular, but the timeline might be a little longer than a 1 year or 2 year campaign. So I started working from a business angle, actually, in a constitutional amendment, and the businessfordemocracy.com is the website for that campaign with Ben & Jerry's and a number of other great groups taking the lead on that American Sustainable Business Council, and working with businesses that are actually trying to build a new economy that's really respectful of people and the environment and sustainable, rather than this, profit at any cost, destroy people and everything else that might get in the way sort of model that rules the world at the moment. And through that, found out about Public Citizens campaign, that they wanted to staff up and really make this a priority for the organization. Got on board in October and have been going ever since, building a movement on the local level, the state level, and the federal level to do this, to pass an amendment, to overturn Citizens United, overturn Buckley versus Vallejo and return the right of Congress to regulate all campaign finance, and we'd like to see public financing with that.
It's excellent. And, a couple of great points to make there was first, gotta love the moms, all the activist moms, because everybody's like, well, my mom's, and I love to hear that. And, every time I get to interview somebody like you, I'm like, well, you should have one proud mother because, look at you. But it always starts with the moms and the dads, but very often the moms. The other thing is, in your lifetime, you've had a fairly wide range of experience around issues. So there's a lot to pull from there. So I want to get into that bit a little bit more. Right now, I was wondering if you could give us like just a quick overview of Public Citizen and Democracy is for People Now, what the missions and goals of that particular organization are.
Sure. So Public Citizen is 40 years old. It was founded by Ralph Nader and the Nader Raiders, and that huge push of public health and safety, consumer protection. One of our great victories was the airbag, getting airbags in cars. So pretty neat stuff, and really focusing, maybe compared to some of the other consumer advocacy groups, in being a voice in Washington with the courts, with Congress, and with the executive branch. So there's a very strong litigation group that does a lot of public interest litigation on a wide variety of topics, including money and politics, but many other things as well. There's a health research group that works on the safety of medical devices, safety of doctors, safety of drugs, and is a watchdog for the FDA. Just looking at the data as an independent group, saying this is not something that should be approved. And also looking at the way that our regulatory agencies are funded. If they're funded by the industry, are they going to regulate well? So that's an incredible piece of work. Then there's Congress Watch, which does a range of different things on congressional issues, but a lot of consumer health and health, safety, protection. It includes campaign finance. So they've long been advocating for disclosure. They were part of both the writing or putting together of the McCain-Feingold Act that was overturned by the Citizens United ruling, and also defending it, have long been champions for Fair Elections Now Act, which Senator Dick Durbin has championed, that would provide public financing for elections. So that's Congress Watch. And then Global Trade Watch works on another major area of attack of corporations on democracy in a global sense. They work on exposing the WTO, NAFTA, all these supposedly free trade agreements that are really international regimes for corporate rule and corporate control, and taking away people's right to make decisions for themselves and within their own countries. There's an energy program that is both an environmental and an energy research group. They do great advocacy. And then, litigation, which I mentioned. So those are the different pieces of the Public Citizens work. Try to be a voice for citizens and our membership around the country. We have 100,000 members of Public Citizens, so we're pretty connected, or we like to try to stay connected to the interests and needs of our members, but also American citizens and everybody who lives here.
Yep. And roughly, again, an example of this wide umbrella and all-encompassing work going on within that organization. So roughly how many people are employed at the organization? Are we talking thousands?
125.
Like
Oh, no.
125?
Oh, 125.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
we're small and efficient. We have a Texas office and a DC office, and that's our staff.
Right. So 125 people seriously committed to changing the world. And part of the reason I'm so excited to have you on is because you're probably our first guest that is working inside a system, an organization whose primary focus sounds like it's on legislative change or that process. Is that accurate?
Change of law. Sure. Congress executive orders and also the executive branch, the different, the EPA versus the SEC, and of course the courts. So, but yes, through law.
Okay, and in your past experience, the organizations you've worked with, have all those been geared towards changing legislation or law, or were some of them more like direct action things? And what I'm looking for is to compare and contrast the methodologies, because you touched on it, that changing the law is a slow, most often a slow and tedious process, and people seem to be somewhat impatient. So if you've seen both sides of that equation, I'd love you to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I have. The Bhopal campaign, actually almost basically all of the work I did up until my work with Public Citizen, except for a brief, I did do an internship on the Hill to better understand Washington and get a feel for how that process works, as small a time as I spent, which is only about 3 months. But besides that, it was what I consider corporate campaigning or public education work.
Mm-hmm.
And we were looking more for shaming a particular bad actor to force them to do a particular set of things. Often we were trying to get the Indian government to take care of their own citizens and advocating through the courts in the Indian system for the Bhopal chemical disaster survivors. But most of that, again, was like individual policymaker choices to help, not a lot of legislation. So it was creating a cultural change and cultural awareness, educating people to the point that they cared enough that the policymakers would feel they needed to act from that, but not necessarily the writing of law itself. I think you need both. You have to have a cultural shift and an enough education amongst people to know what the problem is and to have them advocate for it in a way that brings power to the problem and moves the people who have the power to pass laws. But if you don't have a culture that, loves freedom, for example, and loves the ability to walk about your city without being stopped and frisked because of your race or because of fear that's been sown about this war on terror or any number of infringements on your liberty, if you don't have a sense and a culture that is wrong, then it's not going to stay law, even if you pass a law that says you shouldn't harass people on the street just because of the way they look. So I think they're both really important. I think Occupy has really brought a lot of hope and also a shift of we can act, we can get out in public and do something. So it's really both, and I totally embrace the and. Mm-hmm. You need everything. I think in a democracy, the challenge is lawmaking. You have to be willing to engage in the process at some level if you expect the body to change. If you don't care what laws are made, then it's okay that you don't focus on the lawmaking. But if you get frustrated with the laws that are made and you're not willing to engage when you have the power to engage, well, you're giving away your rights, basically there.
I love that. And we were in a conversation earlier today about how very often in the course of an interview, there's these like pithy little statements that just like arrest your attention. And that one you just made, you embrace the and. It doesn't have to be either or. It can be both, because like in so many other places, there's a lot of fragmentation. And just the message you bring is one of inclusion and unification. So that alone is really inspiring. Never mind the fact that you're just like operating on all these different issues with such a dynamic group. So you brought up Occupy, so I want to go ahead and ask some questions about that. As an observer and a participant, maybe I don't know that what your participation is in Occupy, but how would you evaluate Occupy the movement as an agent for positive social change? How effective has it been? What do you see the challenges are, and what solutions might you suggest?
That's a personal thing. I think I certainly can't speak for any organization on that, so I'm taking off my public citizen hat or even an amendment movement hat and answering that question. Um, I think, as I mentioned, it's been incredible to give people hope. I think people said, oh, like the Obama campaign slogan, hope, crushed people because they put all their faith in this one person and then he couldn't deliver. And Occupy is sort of the opposite of that kind of hope, where it's like you see the action happening and you see people really going out there personally and staying there and not walking away and not giving up. It's been incredible for the movement, and we've passed, in the amendment campaign, we've passed 5 state legislative resolutions, more or less. One is a letter, but 5 state legislatures have called for an amendment, and I think California and Massachusetts likely will very soon. And I think a lot of the energy around local organizing and certainly state organizing in Vermont in particular was inspired. We were working with Occupy, but people were also inspired that they could do something. This is a big problem. Mm-hmm. An amendment is not something that's going to pass in a year or 2 years, even if people see the problem. And so they needed a dose of hope to even dream of looking larger and looking at building something big enough to make this kind of fundamental change. And I think Occupy provided that. And it brought some energy and zest back into the notion of direct action, which I think is critical to any major movement. So I think that example and that training for everyone who was involved was outstanding and will be helpful for many different movements in years to come, regardless of what form Occupy itself takes. Yep. In terms of my personal participation, I did visit the camp in D.C. In McPherson Square a number of times, but I stayed one night. I didn't really engage in a deep way, but I really appreciated the movement and was really grateful for what they're doing. And as you mentioned, we have someone in our office who's been involved with the movement and has connected us with occupiers all over the place. And we're really grateful for all the participation of occupiers all over the country in passing resolutions, calling for an amendment, and engaging in the money and politics conversation.
Excellent. And just for clarification, when you're talking about the amendment, are you talking about state amendments or federal amendments?
I'm talking about a constitutional amendment to the U.S. constitutional amendment, not
right.
state.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify the scope of that because we kind of came to you by chasing down this thread of Vermont versus Citizens United, which I thought was phenomenal, because I think you and I have talked, and I think Citizens United is probably the worst Supreme Court decision in our lifetime, and that's, in my case, that's covering a lot of territory.
Right.
But so I think we're going to be paying the price for that decision for years to come, and the fact that a state was able to successfully challenge that is huge. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that whole process in evolution, how it started, how it gained momentum, what some of the actual work that was involved with, and how was Vermont able to accomplish that task, but Montana recently has not been so successful. What were the differences there?
Let me back up and just talk a little bit about Democracy is for People, which is a campaign within Public Citizen, and just give some background before I dive into Vermont, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah.
So Democracy is for People is part of an amendment movement that includes a number of organizations. You can check us out at democracyisforpeople.org. You can check out all the organizations that are involved with the amendment movement at United, the number 4, thepeople.org. So unitedforthepeople.org. And we're really trying to build broad, connected movement that speaks to people who really care primarily about the environment and care about civil rights, who care about social justice, and just having all these different groups recognize the need to get big money out of our elections if we're going to achieve any of our policy goals, if we're going to see laws passed that we feel reflect the kind of society that we want. So there are different ways that we're doing that. We're trying to pass state resolutions, which are not binding, that show that the legislatures in states would be willing to ratify an amendment if Congress passed it.
Mm-hmm.
And it also usually requires the kind of groundwork where not only does the majority of the legislature in that state say they want an amendment, but we also are able to organize the congressional delegation from that state. And so we have votes towards an amendment in Congress. We are also working on the local level to pass city and town resolutions. 275 cities and towns from New York City to Los Angeles to Jericho, Vermont, have passed resolutions. And we really love doing ballot initiatives as well because it requires a much deeper level of organization and education and a real civic conversation about why we need an amendment. So many of Vermont's town meetings were ballot initiatives, which we're thrilled about. And Massachusetts has passed 65 town meeting resolutions / ballot initiatives as well. Vermont has passed 65. So that's really outstanding. The whole state of Vermont, as a result of this shared effort between Public Citizen and a number of really wonderful partners, including Move to Amend, Common Cause, Vermont Public Interest Research Group, and Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility, to name just a few, including Occupy, really pulled together and organized with citizens who may have been unaffiliated with any of those groups, but together, found each other and connected and made this happen in their towns. So we're really looking to organize from the grassroots level all the way through to Congress, and these are all connected. So that's where the Vermont work came from our perspective. Of course, it came from the grassroots as well. There's no way you can have that kind of just incredible amount of civic action without it coming from people's hearts and from people seeing what's going on in this country and wanting to change it.
Can I interrupt for just one moment? Because I want to make sure I'm clear on this, and it may be an elementary question. But for a constitutional amendment to hold, the amendment has to pass but then be ratified by the states, correct?
Has to pass 2/3 of Congress and be ratified by 3/4 of the states.
Okay, so the importance of the grassroots organization is to get the states on board, so when it goes before the federal government, that all the ducks are in a row and the probability of success is high.
I think that's part of it. I think, this is a democracy movement. There's a lot of components to it,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we want to see a more engaged civil society over the long term. This is a many-year effort. So I don't think that the grassroots is only to organize at the state and federal level, but it certainly will make or break whether we're able to succeed.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just needed to have that path in my head.
Please interrupt. I talk way too much.
No, it's great. So I hope I didn't interrupt your thoughts. So you gave us the background on what Democracy for People's purpose in Vermont was, and so now we're going to talk about the evolution.
Sure. So, just to clarify one thing, you mentioned why did Vermont succeed and Montana failed. I actually think the Montana case that went all the way up to the Supreme Court was really important for focusing the nation's attention on the problem that, a lot of very conservative people are just as disturbed about Citizens United as folks on the left. It's just an incredible violation of what our democracy is about. It's a flood of money standing between citizens and the republic. And the people of Montana saw that their right to regulate who is able to give in their elections was being challenged. Their Corrupt Practices Act, which was enacted after, copper barons were buying seats for themselves in Congress, was just thrown out the window, and no evidence was required by the Supreme Court of corruption. They just said, we think this is true, and thus it is. So I thought it was really important. We never expected that this current sitting Supreme Court would overturn their Citizens United ruling based on the challenge, but it reminded folks that the right of states to protect their own elections from corruption, from the state down to the local level, the school board level, has been quashed by an extremely overreaching Supreme Court. But Montana has a ballot initiative effort underway, and they, like Vermont, are very likely to succeed in calling as a state for a constitutional amendment. And our partners at Common Cause and Free Speech for People have been leading that effort, and I think that they're pretty much have the signatures they need. So I wouldn't say that Montana has failed. It's just reflected the reality at the Supreme Court level.
Okay.
Uh,
Yep.
yeah.
Great. Well, that was helpful. So, I mean, that places it in good context because you know we're all conditioned, and I think I fell into that trap against a success failure thing. It's not like I'm not looking at the incremental picture. So, thank you for pointing that out because now I feel kind of optimistic about it.
Yeah.
What does a local grassroots organizing campaign look like?
Wow.
From the perspective of you know how you guys facilitate that.
I think, they all look completely different and completely the same in certain ways, right? You've got to create a space where people feel valued, that they have input, that you're doing something important, and you're going to be able to make some kind of incremental change in a horizon that they can envision. Beyond that, you either have a group or you don't.
Yeah.
Do you have a plan? Are you trying to enact something? Our local groups are working on local town resolutions. They're working on town ballot initiatives. They're working on county ballot initiatives. They're working on state ballot initiatives. They're lobbying their federal officials. They're educating people. There's so many things they can do, but how they relate to each other, maybe I'm not getting to your question.
Or maybe my question was flawed. I was, I'm thinking of it from the position of if public citizen democracy is for people actually goes in either on the ground or via telecom or digitally. If I wanted to organize, I live in a very small rural community, and we just
Mm-hmm.
had two of the northern county schools closed. It was an arbitrary decision. So the families that
Sure.
live up there are, now the kids are facing a 2-hour one-way commute, and these are kindergarten to middle school. But nobody
Sorry.
knows how to organize to resist that. So as you guys offer tool to activists and and methodologies, so I'm looking for an example of like, okay, we know what the problem is, and the solution is to organize and respond to it. So what are the steps to getting organized? And are you saying that's like situational, dependent on geography, everything else? Or is there like a systematic methodology that you guys use to kind of get that ball rolling?
Sounds like you don't have quite, or you, not just you personally, but people in general don't have quite the vision of what the solution would look like, or the problem just seems totally out of your hands.
Yeah, I would say that because it's a very conservative county in the mountains, and so the city council, the county commission just go, okay, this is it, and everybody goes, okay, what can we do about it? And, they grumble at the stores and stuff, but that's about it. And so as we try to organize and try to, promote responding back to that in a planned and effective manner, it rarely gets traction, but I know it can be done. So utilizing the tools you guys offer, like on your website, you have the tools for activists and things like that. So I guess, that's what, if you could speak to some of that stuff and how they can be utilized by people, just normal, everyday people to address a problem and kind of what kinds of things need to be considered and all that.
Sure. It sounds like one tool that might be useful in your particular situation, or two. There's two actually. One sounds like you know how to organize. You go out to your friends, you have a meeting, you talk about the problem, people share their different versions of what the solution is, and then you figure out who's in power, figure out who influences them, and maybe you feel like you don't have any influence on those people. I don't know, but um, building in the conversation about who's the right messenger that will be listened to by these people in power, everybody has them. I think that's one area where activism sometimes fails, because just because you're right doesn't mean people are going to listen to you. But that doesn't mean you don't know somebody who knows somebody who could be heard, and maybe the language has to be totally different. Like I was talking about states' rights and citizens not being able to be active in the republic. You know, those words mean something very different to you than they do to someone perhaps in rural Montana. But they mean the same thing, basically. It's just the choice of words. And I'm probably not the person that would want to speak those words if I were to reach somebody who felt that they were very different from me. So the messaging, the words chosen, the power mapping, I think is one set of tools that we work with activists on that I think people are very challenged by, because a lot of us really believe in a world where the facts and what's true and what's right and what you would do according to the golden rule should be enough. And I think that's just unfortunately not what power tends to respond to alone, although that may deeply persuade us, and that's why we do this work. That may not be enough for someone else. And so figuring out what is enough, and then having the vision and the skills and the time and resources to enact the vision that your small group of people who are really committed to the issue can believe in and execute. I love the and approach with tactics too. You know, maybe there's some group of people that are going to the small business folks and saying, you know, without the school, there's going to be less business in this town. Would you help us with the council? And then there's another group of people who are saying, you know, to the faith leaders in the community, you know, this is going to tear our community apart because we don't have a meeting place besides the church. And there's all these kinds of functions that go on at the school that we won't really have a space for anymore. And will you help us organize? And so I'm a huge fan of coalition building, I guess is what we're coming down to.
Yeah.
So we have resources for these conversations. We have resources to talk to people about why this is important to them in their particular town, why an amendment is a local issue, even though it's a federal constitutional issue. It also means that if a developer or a big box store wants to come into your town and set up a super PAC and spend 4 times as much as anyone ever spent to run for city council and do whatever they want.
Right.
So it is a local issue, but having those talking points and preparing materials based on what we're seeing over and over and over in different towns allows us to make the best use of people's resources and time knowing their own areas. So there's conservative talking points, like I mentioned, and then there's how to facilitate a meeting, how to create the kind of social space that people want to be in to organize, how to reach the media. We provide a lot of assistance. And even we have democracy teams, which are groups of people or leaders that we work with on a weekly basis, and we can offer more support to. And those folks, we are able to pull media lists for them. I know at least one other partner organization does that as well, and help them with media writing. Is it short? Is it sweet? Is it clear? Nobody wants to read an email with no white space and 2 pages of text. So
I can tell you the production team right now is all of them are sending me notes because I'm the no white space emailer. Clearly, I could use an editor, right? And I find this really interesting because some of the things I believe in you're speaking to, that you're indicating for the progress to be made, it has to be planned, systemic, and sustained on almost any level, because the approach you're talking about, like the power mapping, I'm like, oh, nobody ever thinks about that. I mean, clearly people do think about that, but just generally speaking, that is a piece of the puzzle on a local level. But when you say it, it makes so much sense. And I think we tend to be fairly impatient. In your organization, do you guys talk about this stuff, like how to sustain the effort? Because some of these things have to be endless. And so how do you and your coworkers and your collaborators maintain momentum over a long period of time that has tedious elements?
Yeah, that is a great question, because that's going to be true for any movement. And I think my answer has changed, honestly. I think for a democracy movement, like what we're doing, there are different pieces. Democracy is under attack by corporate power in a number of ways. It's under attack at the global level with global trade policy and now this Trans-Pacific Partnership that's coming. It's under attack for our voting rights and this American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, taking away students, elderly people, people of color's right to vote. It's under attack with disclosure. Now the far radical right is trying to get rid of what disclosure we have about who is trying to buy our elections and our politicians. It's about public financing. It's about shareholders having the right to know how their money is being spent by the big publicly owned corporations. So there's so many ways to get at the problem. You know, Obama could require federal contractors to disclose what they're giving, because the opportunity for corruption there is clear.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of little victories along the way, and the way that you sustain it is finding those sweet spots where you can see progress and going there. And maybe it doesn't feel like voting rights or public financing will get you to an amendment, but if you've done everything you can and you hit a wall on the amendment work, maybe a bunch of your allied organizations are trying to push through something for shareholder disclosure or for voting rights, and you can be a good ally, as hopefully they've been to you, in getting a resolution passed on the local or state level, and chip in there and be part of their small victories and build some of that quid pro quo partnership that may be needed to really sustain those relationships and make it worthwhile for them to be part of your future work. So I think there's some sharing there. And I also think there's a culture thing. Like, if you don't have a group that's really fun, where you get some laugh, where you feel like you contribute and you have a space to speak, it's not going to be sustainable. I think that's the hard part, is it fun? I want to have fun doing this. This is one life you live. You want to really make it worth it. You want to serve justice, but you also want to laugh.
I love that. I keep saying, for all this work we're doing, we need to have equal amount of fun or more fun, because that's what keeps you going through the dark times. And you've kind of touched on, you said you're a really big believer in coalition building, and the points you just spoke to were, you're referencing that. And so, as you probably know, one of the big challenges of Occupy is how to unify all these different people with all these different ideas. You spoke to tactics. There's a lot of people who have different tactical visions. So how do we effectively build a coalition so we can operate as a unified voice, or is that necessary? I mean, I feel like it is, but maybe I have a blind spot. So a little bit on just coalition building, or a little bit more on coalition building.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a challenge. I don't think that every single person or organization is made to be in every single coalition. I think that's something that my mentor taught me. My mentor is a passionate coalition builder, but he said, I asked for advice working on this movement, because I saw that there was an incredible need for consensus amongst all the different groups that are impacted by money in politics to connect on this and to take a stand on it. And he said, the one piece of advice I have to give to you is I've started a number of coalitions where one really destructive organization or person destroyed it, and you had to shut it down and start it over again. I've had that, happen in cooperatives that I've lived in also, where there may be another coalition for that person or that organization that would be perfect for them and really roll with the way that they work, but certain situations are not going to work for certain individuals, and they will destroy what could be very productive.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen that play out all that much in my own work, I have to say, but I thought it was very wise. And I think that's a challenge because we want to invite everyone to the table and include them, and we have to make sure that everyone's voices are heard at a certain point. But then, and continue to do that as we're building a movement. We can't suddenly say, well, this is it, we found the perfect coalition. Now, we don't need anybody else. You always need other people, and different people are going to find other things that are more important and leave. But there are people and organizations that will keep you from going anywhere. Mm-hmm. And you have to be willing to say, you know what, just like any other relationship, this is not productive. And we have to be able to move on. So that would be my one piece of advice. And I think you learn a lot from allowing disruptive voices in from time to time to challenge you and make sure that you're really doing what you should be doing. But sometimes the disruptive voices are just disruptive, and recognizing that at a certain point and being able to say, this is not the best space for you to do your work in the world, and there's going to be a space for you, but not it.
Yeah, that's a really wise observation, because coalition building by nature and definition is inclusive. So, and inclusive, in my mind, inclusive means inclusive. So everybody comes to the table, but it's sometimes not the table is not the right place for everybody. So it's a dicey thing about how you deal with it. And I think a lot of times we're hesitant in saying, okay, there are borders, there are boundaries. Our goal is to be productive, and being able to make that tough decision and work it out. Is Public Citizen, what's your organizational model there? Are you guys, is it hierarchical? Is it sort of flat? Is it circular? Or how do you guys work?
Well, we are a 501c3 nonprofit, so we have a board of directors who the president reports to and is accountable to, and there are president, directors, and then program staff at different levels. So certainly there is a hierarchy. Mm-hmm. And then we have our members who drive a certain amount of our work. On the Democracy is for People campaign, we're extremely member driven, and we're developing much more of a grassroots model for our campaign, but that doesn't necessarily reflect the litigation group, which serves their clients and serves the public interest, but not necessarily a large constituency depending on the case. Mm-hmm.
Well, I asked that question because I presumed is probably hierarchical, and mm-hmm. Just to give an example of a hierarchy that works, because myself included, we're all about, hierarchies are bad, but only bad hierarchies are bad, so there's room for all of it. So it's really makes me optimistic to hear that there's pretty much a formal structure that's fairly traditional, and still you're able to do some amazing work. And I'm guessing you probably enjoy it, because I can see your face light up when you're talking about your successes and all that, and the necessity for fun. So that's really inspiring that can happen. What strategies or suggestions can you give to all of us out here and all the people watching as activists that are committed to social justice causes? What suggestions can you give us for how to act on those? Just as a single person, what's our next step as single people to act on our particular causes?
I don't know if there's an answer to that question. It's so broad. Can you specify a little bit more what you mean?
Oh, well, okay, so we have all these people, like there's all these people watching, and we're scattered all over the United States and all over the world. And I kind of think fundamentally we all want the same thing. We want a better world. And we define that in different ways. But how do we, in the absence of a mother that gets us out of bed to rise and shine and do good in the world, what do we do when we rise and shine? How do we step through the world? What's a good small way to start?
Well, I'm gonna draw an organizer X actually, who kind of shares my philosophy and I think enacts it even better than I do in many, many ways. And just really listening and loving and trying to understand everybody that we're interacting with. I can't speak to an activist step because everybody's cause is different, and I think the way that people are effective is different. Someone might be really good at public speaking, someone else might just be a really great yoga teacher, and that's what they need to be doing. But I think, are you a good neighbor? Are you a good member of your family? Are you somebody who reaches across class and race barriers? Are you someone that makes yourself uncomfortable so you can better understand people that are different than you? And then you can share your passion with them about why you care so much about this issue. But are you making the world a better place everywhere you go in what you do? I think that is the most effective thing. I think, if people don't connect to you, they're not going to hear what you're trying to convey. And I think so many activists are just naturally trying to change systems and educate people. You're not going to reach them if you don't connect.
Oh, I love that. That's another pithy quote. Clearly, we're keeping. This is great. That was so eloquent and beautiful. It kind of made tears come to my eyes. Thank you
Well,
for
don't think
for
it's written on my wall. I look at it every.
communicate to connect. Let's hold it up. Let's get it a bit. Communicate to connect first and convey second. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. That's
Oh, sorry.
wonderful. I
Yeah.
loved I loved that
I
you had
really
that.
believe that.
That was
It's hard.
that's such I mean that was the perfect answer to a very meandering question. Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to give you the chance to speak to anything that you might like to, any other points you might want to make while I wait for some of the questions, if there are any, to roll up on the chat. So if you
Sure.
have any points you'd like to add or any closing comments, then we'll take a few questions.
Yeah, I think one thing that I want to add, I hope that people go to democracyisforpeople.org and check us out, sign our petition. We can let you know about things going on in your area and ways you can make a difference that are real small and easy or really deep, and help support you in doing that. I do think, if you're working with a large organization that isn't activated on this issue yet, we would love to hear from you and see how we can engage them, because everybody needs to get on board, at least as a principle, not necessarily working on it, if we are going to succeed in passing constitutional amendment. We do support a specific amendment, although all of our coalition work is very general, just says an amendment. But we support the Sanders-Deutsch amendment. I believe the Deutsch amendment in the House of Representatives has the most supporters out of anything thus far. And just to really briefly explain why, it would allow Congress to regulate contributions and expenditures in elections, which hasn't been allowed since the late 70s, to stop this huge flood of money that's drowning out our voices and filling our airways with clear lies. And it's totally terrifying. I'm terrified for this election because literally all of the airtime is bought up in most states that are going to be contested. And so the super PACs have already bought that time. So we're going to have to do incredible organizing, incredibly connected people to get across messaging that's not, legally allowed to be wrong and confusing and make people care less and feel disconnected more from their government, because that's what negative advertising does. Anyway, I digressed a little bit.
No, that's great. Keep on.
Why we need an amendment so that this is not allowed to happen. But it also raises the question of corporate rights under the Constitution. We don't believe that for-profit corporations or corporations in general are people, but for-profits in particular have a profit motive, which makes it very likely that whatever interests they're advocating for with their money are for profit. They're not for shareholders, they're not for owners, they're maybe they're for owners, but they're certainly not for employees or people buying the products. And so it's almost guaranteed that it's going to be corrupting. And so they should not be allowed, nobody should be allowed to give large amounts of money in our elections, period. So the amendment would certainly deal with that. But they should also not have the right to say, well, it's our right not to speak by labeling cigarettes that they're going to kill you. No. It's people's right to know. So corporate for-profit claims to a number of constitutional rights are extremely problematic. And so the Sanders-Deutsch language raises those questions and engages us in a deeper conversation about what is a citizen? Is it a for-profit corporation? No. But we also raise concerns about protecting the rights of assemblies of people to advocate for policies through nonprofits, through unions, not through elections. Nobody should be giving large amounts, as I said, but the rights of organizations like the NAACP and nonprofits like Public Citizen and Planned Parenthood to advocate for policy and issues could potentially be curtailed if nonprofits lost all of their constitutional rights. So it would preserve the rights of non-business affiliated organizations. So a company can't just open a nonprofit and give all their money through there to do issue ads, even though it's not a campaign finance thing. There's this gray area of issue ads, right? Any business-funded entity, nonprofit or otherwise, would not have constitutional rights under the Sanders-Deutsch Amendment. That's a ripe conversation that's in the movement, and it's a source of some divisions within the movement. We're more interested in unity in the movement overall, but we do have that perspective, and it's worth mentioning. So check us out, democracyisforpeople.org. You can check out the hub and hear about other organizations at united4thepeople.org. It's unitedforthepeople.org, and get involved either way. We'd love to hear from you.
Excellent. Really, just really great. I mean, this is one of those interviews where I'm gonna stay up all night digesting it and thinking about it. Thank you for being so informative and so well prepared. You're an impressive woman. So the first question I have, I'm trying to think of how to put this in an appropriate manner. I think I'll just read it off. How many people of your age are engaged in activity in your organization? So we're looking for the demographic makeup of your organization, because you're young and smart, and we're all just knocked out by that. And we're wondering, is the Public Citizen tend to be a fairly youthful organization, or is it the demographic of the folks that work with Public Citizen? This is important stuff, because it's like youthful energy versus and combined with maturity and experience, and how does all that fit together? So I think that's the source of this question.
I'm 45 years old, right?
No, I don't know.
Kidding.
You're 45 years old.
Public Citizen's demographic does trend towards baby boomers and a little bit older. So we are working really actively to develop a student and youth campaign for the fall, and would love to invite your questioner to send us an email at amendment@citizen.org, amendment@citizen.org, and get involved with student and youth outreach, because you're right. There has to be more youth involvement in the movement. But I also think it's an interesting question, because after people get out of school, after they don't have, they're not like technically young, like 30 and above, do they just disappear into this vortex where you can't organize them, maybe because of people having families? It's harder to figure out how to reach people who aren't going to an activist organization already, or aren't going to a faith community, who are well out of school and well out of kind of the networking, going out spaces that you find young people in. So I'm curious how, to throw the question back, how others would say they want to organize people under 40, perhaps.
That's great. I love that you throw the question back, because it's a good challenge, and it's something worth spending some time on, I think. I mean, I work with a lot of young people, mid-20s to 30s, and we come at things from different angles, but we are able to accomplish a lot. And I always say, okay, those guys carry me because they got more energy, and so it's a good to have a mix. And so I thought that was a good question. I love that you threw it back. The next one is, do petitions really work? And the follow up to that is, what are your observations about Move On? Because Move On has all the online petitions, and I think the question is that sitting down and doing your 20 online petitions a day, is that valuable expenditure of time? What are your observations on petitions?
I could tell you what we use our petitions for. I can't speak to that in general as much, but for our campaign, people sign the petition as a way to get invited to take part in organizing. And then we also bring the petitions to Congress and try to persuade members of Congress that given the number of people who've signed in their district, they really should get on board with an amendment. In fact, we're doing that in partnership with People for the American Way on July 17th, when there'll be the first hearings on constitutional amendments in our Senate. So that will be very helpful, because there's a lot of folks who haven't prioritized taking a position on amendment, but really should and have the support from their constituents to do so. So the petition allows us to do that. But really, if you do a petition and you don't really get any contact from that organization, either phone or email, it may be a 1 or 2 time use. There is a question, I guess, about how useful that is. But for us, the petition is the main way that anyone gets engaged with the campaign. So it's incredibly helpful for us.
So it serves as an entry point for us.
Yes.
Like, we signed a petition, then we're in, and then we have a connection, and we can start from there. Okay.
Right. We can say there's someone organizing in Kansas City. We can say, call the Senate on the 17th, which is actually something I don't want to forget to tell folks. Call your senators on July 17th. It's the day of a Senate hearing on amendments. If you want a constitutional amendment, that's a day to say, either thank you, like Senator Sanders, for being a champion on a constitutional amendment, or have you signed on to one yet? Have you signed on to 3 yet? Please sign on to a constitutional amendment, or 1 or more, because we really need this change, and it's not going to happen unless you stand up for the right thing.
Right. So everybody get that, July 17th? Call your congressperson.
Yes.
Be local.
Thanks.
Squeaky wheel gets the grease. Make noise. Do we have any more questions from the chatters, or are we going to call this one about done? Anybody has questions, speak up. The bad part about the way this all works is, if somebody's watching us on another channel, they have to come to our channel to do questions, and then they go, oh, I wish I had gotten over there and I missed the question and answer part. So I'm not getting any more in the chat stream, so I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you so much for being here. It was really informative and very enjoyable, and I think you gave us a lot to think about. I know you leave me feeling really optimistic, and empowered, right? Because I'm like, wow, I'm hearing what you say. I can make a power map of our county. I can do that. And the part that you mentioned about having the right messenger was critical, because I am not the right messenger, but I know how to find the right messenger. So we appreciate that very much. I don't know if you're seeing the chat, but people are sending their thanks, and I think you've really lit a lot of people up tonight. And this is what we try to do with our channel. We want to educate, inform, and reach out, and we're trying to provide an environment where people can come together. And I think you've contributed to that greatly tonight, and I really am thankful for it. And so are the other people. So I want to thank the other channels that are mirroring us. I'm going to pause this and archive it. And chatters, I'll be back with you in a minute. Please hang around, because I want to give you some programming notes. We're doing our first series next week, so I want to kind of clue you in on that. Thank you, Clearly, for starting the coordination of this. And Thank you, Aquene, for being here and giving us this part of your evening. I really appreciate it. So,
Thank you so much.
oh yeah, if you'll hold on for a bit, I'm going to pause this, archive it, and we'll finish up offline, okay?